Hello there, my name is Jaden Calderon, and this is my Genius Era Project Comics. So, my first question is, what was my goals? And so my goals were, number one, would try to get at least 3, maybe 4 comics done by the end of the 10 weeks of this project. Number 2, that I would try to develop a cleaner art style that wasn't as messy and is a bit more refined and realistic. Number 3, that I would try to create longer stories with a plot that would have character arcs and more intricate fighting scenes, as I like to write action comics. Number 4, that with every comic I would find better and more effective ways to keep my stories together instead of stapling them together, which is actually called bookbinding. Number 5, when writing my comics, I would try to find better tools to write and draw them by using the other drawing supplies I have around my house. Second question was, did I meet all my goals? If not, what changes did I make? So I actually did make all my goals. I did finish so I did get at least 3 comics done. That was the minimum. I did get a better art style with especially my first comic, which is actually the one I tried very hard on. I did create longer stories. The first one was very long. With every comic, I did find a different way to put them together. The first one I stapled. The second one I hole punched and then put something called round heads, and that kept the thing together. And then my third one I taped. And then my fifth one, I did use different tools. My first comic I used pencil. I used a pencil. My second comic I used pencil and marker. And then my third comic I used a pen. But what happened with my second comic was that when I tried to use a marker over the pencil, it actually bled through, which made the comic look more messy, so I didn't want that to happen, so I decided to just do it for 1 page. So, I did make most of my goals except for that one, and I did not finish my comics by the certain date that I wanted, but I did finish them. So I changed not using marker on that second comic and not getting this done by that certain date. Did I end up doing exactly what I proposed in the beginning? I did. I finished all my comics and I made all the goals, just not by that certain date, and with the marker on that second comic. The work that was completed, I finished all my comics, and I used different arts, and I had different art styles for each. I used different supplies, and yeah. The progress that was accomplished, I really worked hard on my first one. So what I did with that one was I made a rough draft, which is basically a rough version of your comic where you have like sketched out lines and where you get your ideas all out. And so I did that, and then when I was done with my rough draft, I traced over the lines with solid lines instead of sketchy lines, and then that would be so I had a final version and a rough draft version. But actually with that comic, at one point in the story, it actually switches from the final version to the rough draft version, because in that part of the story, the plot changes, and I actually wanted to have the physical copy of the comic change as well, so that it would have like a different type of feeling. How much progress do I feel that I made personally? I think I did pretty good. I got a better art style because of my first comic, because when I did my rough draft, I tried to make the art style look better, more refined, more clean, and I tried to make it look a bit more, just better with movements, with action poses and stuff like that. So the purpose of my project was so that I would just get some comics done that I've been wanting to do for a while, and also because I love drawing. It's one of the things it's one of my favorite things to do. I chose this project, well, as I said, because I love drawing since I was a little kid, and I actually made comics in my past time. I just never took them as seriously, but now I have, because it was for a grade, and I actually really enjoyed that I worked harder. Any additional benefits that I didn't expect was the rough draft, because even that thing took a very long time, and that ended up making me spend more time on my first comic than the others. But I still love that rough draft because it helps you get your ideas out, and then you can just see which things work, and you can change things along the way. And then, yeah, it was a really good idea to just get your ideas out so that you wouldn't have to, you could change them all along the way. So, did I meet my goals? I did, as I said before. And what goals am I still working towards achieving? Oh, none of them. I finished them all. Do I see any improvement? Yes, I definitely do, because if you look at my first comic, when I show this as an evidence, the first comic looks, the first page, at the beginning, it looks drastically different from when it does at the end, which I find very interesting. With my second comic, same thing. The first part looks a little bit less refined, but then the second part, it looks much better. And then my third comic, the entire time, it just looked, I think it was really good, because when I was finally getting into the groove of how my art style was. So with my final comic, I think I had my art style down, and I improved very well. How do I feel about this project? I actually really liked it, because, like I said, I loved drawing when I was a young boy, and so being able to do that for a grade, I just thought that was amazing. And this has actually re-sparked my interest for making comics and drawing in general, because I love doing this. It's like one of my favorite things in the world, and yeah, I really like this project. If I could do this project over again, what would I do differently? I would definitely not do the rough draft, because even though it's such a good idea, it actually took way too much time, as I said, and I didn't get to work on my 2 other comics as much as I wanted to. If I could continue this project, what would I do differently? I'd do better. I mean, I was working hard on this, but I want to work harder if I wanted to continue this. In the summer, I do plan on actually trying to finish some of these up a little more. I mean, they're finished, but I want to touch them up a little more and just make them look a little better. But yeah, this has definitely changed my habits schoolwork wise, because I used to work on my schoolwork quite regularly, quite often, but with this, I worked very hard for very long amounts of time, and it showed me how much better you can do if you just put the time and effort into things. And I really tried to put in some good time and effort in this. And so, yeah, my working on schoolwork, the habit really got better. So, the grade that I think that I earned would be a 3.3 to a 3.7. I worked very hard on this comic, but on one of my comics, but on my other 2, they didn't get to be worked on as much, because I was working so hard on my first one, and so they do look not as refined or as good, but they still are quite well done, I'd say, and I finished them, and that was really what was important to me. And yeah, I still would work really hard on each one. So, beginning to compare to where I am now, I didn't have 3 comics before, and now I do, which is just phenomenal for me, because like I said, when I don't usually take this thing seriously when I do this in my leisure time, but doing this for a grade, I had to get these things done, and I did, and I'm just so happy and surprised that I ended up getting this all finished. As of right now, I'm not continuing this project. I might work on it in the summer, as I said, and just, touch things up and refine things up a little more. The growth that I saw was definitely my art style, because of that rough draft on that first comic, I was able to just work on drawing things a little better, and I didn't have the pressure of making them perfect, because on the final comic, I wanted it to look really good first try, as if I had done it first try, but I'd actually worked on the rough draft, which was actually my first try, and then I could just trace over it, and yeah, that I really grew in how well I draw, my drawing style, and yeah. The changes that I wish I did, as I said, was the rough draft, even though it was a really great idea, because it just took so long, and it was not it took too much time, and I didn't get to work on my 2 other comics as much as I wanted. The most difficult and the least difficult part of this project, the most difficult was definitely the rough draft, as I've said, because it just took so long, so much time. It was good, it helped me with my style, but it just took a long time. The least difficult part of this project was definitely just coming up with ideas for what would happen in the comic, because when you're making a comic, you choose what happens, and coming up with things that would happen next. I never really had writer's block, so it was honestly just, I guess it's just creativity and in my imagination that were really just strong in this project. And the obstacles that I had to overcome was definitely procrastination, because I'm not gonna lie, I worked on this thing till the end. I really pushed through to get this done all the way to the end. So yeah, I've been working on this like up to the last minute. So yeah. So here is my comics one by one. Okay. So this is my first one, and it is called Captain Hot Dog versus the Insulter. And as you can see in the beginning, it's not as detailed or refined. It still looks pretty good, I'd say, but if you keep going, see, it's still pretty good, but right here is when things really start looking great, because this is the point that I started my rough draft, so I traced over all that, and then I worked really hard on those cars. I designed them. I worked really hard on this Captain Hot Dog, like, rushing over right here to go fight the Insulter. I worked really hard on this one, because this was an especially long panel, and I was tracing over my rough draft with a phone, and it was kind of small, and so it was kind of hard for me to fit the entire panel so I could trace it all, especially this one. This was a very big panel. Actually, this is a panel is a square that contains all the images and stuff in a comic, and I really love this one. It's a zoom in into Captain Hot Dog, into Mustard Man, Ketchup Man, what am I saying? And this is the Insulter. I don't even know my own characters' names. And then, as I said before, this is actually my rough draft, and this is my final. And so right here, this is where the story changes. And so right here, this is where it ends. So everything changed. The story, my comic changed not only story-wise, but also physically. And I wanted that to just kind of like be put to the next, to a higher level. And so there's also some notes. So it's kind of like a behind the scenes of how the ideas and thoughts that I went through into making this. And I worked really hard on designing outfits and suits for each one. And very hard. And then the end. They all cry at the end because they get hit by a bubble that makes them think about their insecurities. This is my second comic. It was called People Persons. And the marker, as I said, it bled through, which made it look not so good and messy, which is why I only did marker for the first page. And, oh, look, right here, it moves. Oh, look at that. And this one was a little shorter, but right here is when things start to look good. I have to use arrows to point to where how you read this in order. And so there's from there to there to there to there, and then there to there to there, and then end. And this one I used the round heads, which is basically I hole punched this comic, and so I put the round head through the hole, and these prongs at the end that I laid out, and so it kept the comic book together. This is the one that I stapled. That's my first comic, and then for my third comic I taped it. And so the best way to keep my comic together turned out to be using the round heads on my second comic. And so my third comic, I worked on this one quite recently, and as you can see, I used the same type of paper I used for my rough draft, and the same type of style for my rough draft. I really liked the sketchy lines I had done, so I decided to use it for this entire comic. it's quite, like, it's pretty simple. I like it because it starts out really slow. It's just he's sleeping, he wakes up, but then you see he blasts it with his laser, and it's very slow paced, but and then there's a little bit of action because he has powers that he secretly uses. Like right there, he shoots the straw that the guy's spitting out of. He snaps his fingers and he's gone. Uses his mind powers to move the chalk to write the answer. Uses his powers, and this is my favorite part is right here. Where he makes this electrical sphere that just blasts the bad guys because the bad guys stole some money, and I love this scene because I used some reference art online to like just get this to look look really good, and it's just slow right back to the end. And yeah, it's longer than my second comic, but shorter than my first. But that is my comics, like actually them. So in the end, I really enjoyed this. It sparked my interest for comics again and drawing in general, and I really, really liked it. So thank you for watching my Genius Hour presentation of Genius Hour Project presentation comics.